Hey Bobcats, I hope you're doing well. If you are taking notes, go ahead and take a moment, pause the video and set up your notes. We're going to be talking about vertical angles today. The key thing that you want to keep in mind as we're talking about vertical angles is that they are congruent. So let's add that little note. Vertical angles are congruent. That is different than the problems that we've been solving so far. We've been doing supplementary, complementary, and adjacent angles, where the angles would add together to either equal 90 degrees, 180 degrees, or whatever the two adjacent angles add to. Vertical angles are a little bit different. So let's kind of warm up here for a moment, and then I'll get some problems that involve a little bit more algebra involved. All right, so let's start with this problem. I'm going to draw a picture first, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so remember, vertical angles are created when two lines intersect each other. Looking at this vocab foldable, when two lines intersect each other, it creates two congruent angles. So this angle right here and this angle down here, this angle and this angle would be considered congruent to each other, meaning they would have the same measure. Same thing with this angle and this angle. They would be congruent to each other, meaning that they would have the same measure. So let's set this up. Let's say that this angle right here is 38 degrees. And we want to find out what x is and also find the measure of these opposite angles here too. So we're going to find x, and then we're going to find the measure of all the angles. Okay, so the angles, vertical angles are congruent to each other. So if this angle is 38 degrees, that means that this angle is also 38 degrees. So that's pretty simple. 38 and 38. Now, that's what x is equal to. X is equal to 38 degrees. But what about these other angles? You might be unsure of how to approach this. So I'm going to help you out a little bit. I'm going to cover this up. Now look what we have. This is a straight line. So these two angles are supplementary to each other, which means that they add up to 180 degrees. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to say 180 degrees minus 38 degrees. Do a little scratch work over here. 180 degrees minus 38 degrees, or 38 degrees, is equal to 142 degrees. That means this is equal to 142 degrees. Well, let's make this easy. This angle right here and this angle right here are considered vertical angles, which means that this also has to be 142 degrees. Now, if you want to be sure that you've done your algebra correctly, then go ahead and add up all of these degrees. It should add up to 360 degrees because it is the distance all the way around the angle. All right. So that's a pretty straightforward example. Remember, vertical angles are congruent to each other. Now let's get a little bit more algebra involved here. Hold on, I lost my place. Just a moment. All right. So I'm going to draw a picture first. Okay, so let's say that this angle right here is 2x degrees, and this angle is 128 degrees. So just like on the last problem, we're going to find x, and we're also going to find the measure of all the angles. Okay? All right, so let's get started first with finding out what x is. Now this angle and this angle are considered vertical angles, which means that they are equal to each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that this angle 2x is equal to this angle, which is 128 degrees. Okay, now I can just solve for x. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get that x is equal to 64 degrees. Okay, so x is equal to 64 degrees. Now, 64 degrees times 2 is 128 degrees. So that means this is 128 degrees and this is 128 degrees. Now, we haven't found the measure of all the angles yet, so let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and cover this up. If you look at this, this is a supplementary angle that adds up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to do 180 degrees minus 128 degrees, and we should be able to find the measure of that angle. 52 degrees. Okay, now this angle right here is a vertical angle to this angle right here. So if this angle is 52 degrees, this angle also has to be 52 degrees. And there we have it. We found x and we found the measure of all of our angles. Now I'm going to have you practice a few. I'm going to try very hard not to cut it off this time, so I'm going to move my sheet up. All right, let me draw these pictures. For each of these pictures, you're going to find x, and you're going to find the measure of all of the angles that are missing. This is number 1. This is 56 degrees, and this is 4x degrees. So you're going to find x, and then you're going to find the measure of all the angles. Then number 2. This is 3x degrees, and this is 117 degrees. Okay, go ahead and find x and find the measure of all the angles. Pause the video now, see if you can find x and all the angles, and then when you're finished, press play and make sure that you're correct. All right, let's see how you did. First of all, these are vertical angles, which means that they're equal to each other. The measure of those angles is equal to each other. So that means 4x is equal to 56. So we're just going to solve for x. And we get that x is equal to 114. Okay? So this is x. And now we're going to find the measure of all the angles. Well, 4 times 14 we already know is going to be 56 because these are vertical angles, which means that they are congruent. They have the same measure. Now I'm going to ignore this for a moment. This is supplementary. So to find the measure of this angle, I'm just going to subtract 56 from 180. Okay, 124 degrees. Now this right here, this is a vertical angle to this angle over here. So if this is 124, this is also going to be 124 degrees. Now let's look at number 2. This angle and this angle are considered vertical angles, which means they're equal to each other. So this is going to be 3x is equal to 117 degrees. We're going to divide both sides by 3 to solve for our x, and we get that x is equal to 39, I believe, 39 degrees. Okay, so we found x. Now we're going to find the measure of all of our angles. Well, if this angle is 117 degrees, that means this is also 117 degrees. We also know this because 39 times 3 is 117. And then we're going to ignore this portion. These are supplementary angles. So 180 minus 117 degrees is 63 degrees. Now this angle is a vertical angle to this angle, so they are congruent. They have the same measure. So this is also 63 degrees. All right, Bobcats, I hope that went well. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. See you next time.